Hello and welcome. I have with me tonight one of our real leaders in Minnesota. Betty McCollum is my guest. And as most of you know, she's a Congresswoman from the 4th Congressional District here in St. Paul and Ramsey County and Washington County. She's been a U.S. Congresswoman since 2001, just starting your 9th term. So I'm delighted you could be with me, and we're going to talk about her early days, some about her personal life, as well as her thoughts on leadership and some of the challenges of being a Congresswoman, especially in this time. So we're going to have to make the most of our 30 minutes.
A lot to cover.
A lot to cover. Well, let's start. You grew up, let's start way back. You grew up in Minneapolis, or South St. Paul.
Well, I was born in Minneapolis. But I don't remember much of that. My father was attached with the Air Force, so we traveled around a little bit, but home for him was South St. Paul. Okay. So we always called South St. Paul home, and came back and started grade school and graduated from South St. Paul High School in 1972. And now I live in St. Paul.
So very much a Minnesotan. And you went to St. Kate's.
Yeah.
What did you major in? I didn't read that.
I majored in education, so I was a licensed, my license has since lapsed, social science teacher. And so I went to St. Kate's for that, and it was absolutely great. But I did my first 2 years at Immer Hills Community College because I put myself through, as a student, my first 2 years there. Because,
and then graduated
from St. Kate's.
I see. And then where did you teach?
I never got a full-time class.
Oh, you didn't?
So I did some long-term subbing. I did some work in North St. Paul school districts, and then in Park and Cottage Grove. And Lynn Price, when he was in the Minnesota State House, I substituted for him a little bit when he was doing his duties at the Minnesota State Legislature. So I applied for a job at Montemedi, and I walked in and they said, oh, you're very qualified and everything. And then the person from Human Resources came out and said, but we do have one question for you. And I said, yeah. And they said, can you coach football? And it was that was what would happen, especially for women at the time applying for social studies jobs. Most of the social studies teachers were also coaches, so they would be a geography teacher, maybe a U.S. world history teacher to coach hockey, or they would teach the economics and they would coach basketball. And so it made it a little difficult for me because I didn't have any. Football
wasn't your forte.
I told her I thought they offered classes at the University of Minnesota and I would take them to get the job. And, I was just back out at Montemedi, and the principal there brought it up when he was introducing me to the faculty that they almost hired me, but I didn't have that coaching certificate.
Oh, that's good. Had you any thought in your mind as a young woman in college that you might end up in politics? Were you admiring political leaders? Was there any clue when you think back?
No, there really wasn't. I grew up in a household with a mixed marriage, a Lutheran mother and a Catholic father, a Republican pro-choice mother, and a father who was very involved in labor politics. But my parents never argued about politics. They just discussed it, and we always had the news on. And at the end of the day, the conversation was what was going to be the best for our family and our community moving forward. And so I grew up in a house where politics
congenial, wasn't it?
Yeah, and so it was just part of your civic engagement to vote. And if you had parents who voted for different people, it wasn't the polarization that you feel now. And I think that served me very well in Congress. I go over and work on the other side of the aisle, walk over to the other side of the aisle, and sometimes people go, how can you stand Republicans? And I said, well, my mother made sure I grew up to be.
Well, I bet that did make a big difference.
It really did. And
comfort level.
And they weren't able to be married in a church at the time back in 1950. in the 1950s, right? So my mother kept her Lutheran faith, my father kept his Catholic faith. They were always very respectful of each other. And so I really think the things that you learn at home, sometimes you don't know how they're going to be valuable in your life later on. And their civic engagement is probably what got me involved in city council work, and not waiting for other people to do things, but knowing that you had a responsibility to not just speak up, but also take action on your words.
What did your folks do in terms of work or careers?
So my mother was a flight attendant back in the day with Republic Airlines, and she flew here to Chicago, Twin Cities to Chicago. It was World Chamberlain at the day, and then she got some flights to New York. My father was stationed at the Air Force Reserve Base, and after she married my father, she was no longer allowed to be a flight attendant or stewardess, should I say.
Old rule.
Right, and then once her employer discovered that she was expecting, they told her they wished her all the best in her marriage and her pending arrival, and promptly told her not to report to work again. So, she later on worked at the J.J. Hill Library doing catalog and that. My father, very active in the community and did a lot of different sales jobs.
Have they lived to see your work now as Congresswoman?
No, they were both alive to see me get sworn into office at the State House, but no, they passed.
They'd be so proud, I'm sure. Tell us the story of how you got involved in politics. It's kind of a unique little story. You were living in North St. Paul, and I don't know all the details, but
Well, my husband at the time, Doug, and I, we both grew up in South St. Paul, and we couldn't find a house that we could afford. So we landed up in North St. Paul, just a wonderful community, great neighbors, and we lived a block from a park. And there was one of these really tall slides. I mean, they don't have them anymore, but the slides that 16 feet in the air, And my daughter went up on it, and she, a young child in front of her got kind of rambunctious, and my daughter landed up flipping over. My husband had been standing behind her, flipping over my husband and landing on the ground. So she fractured her skull, but she was fine. So the next day, Katie and I walked down to the park, and all the moms were there, and we'd been talking about how we needed to have sand put around, and we needed to have the merry-go-round fixed. And I said, we should just walk the block over to the city hall and tell them. Yeah, we should do that. I said, okay. So I thought we were all going to walk down together. I ended up walking down by myself and met with the city manager, and then went to the city council meeting because it was kind of a discussion of whether or not they were going to do the hockey boards first, put those up because it was getting close to fall, or what they exactly were going to do. So I decided to go to the city council meeting and assume the sale. I thanked them for working on the park equipment, and then found out a couple of the gentlemen who were on the council were retiring, and my neighbors encouraged me to run to do the follow-through. Lost my first election.
Oh, you
and
did.
Then it came in dead dog last. There was a retired police officer running. The mayor's daughter, who I became very close friends with, was running. There were like 7 or 8 people, and the top 2 vote getters would win. And the mayor came up to me afterwards, and he said, well, for a Democrat, you weren't too bad. You ran a positive campaign, and you didn't have anything but good things to say about what you wanted to do for the community. So he put me on the Parks and Recs board, and 2 years later, I ran for city council and won.
So you weren't deterred, and I suppose having
you
that
can't take it personally.
Right.
I mean, this isn't about me as a human being. This is about me offering my service. And sometimes people will think the service is a good alignment, and sometimes they won't. I bet that's been an important value for you or tenet to remember. Yeah. I think that's really important. I mean, sometimes, especially nowadays, the personal attacks that just fly right and left is really disappointing to me, and I think it's a real disservice to our democracy. And I think it's keeping, I know it's keeping, because I've recruited people to run for school boards or city councils or state house or Congress, is keeping good people from running because they go, I don't want to be personally attacked. That's not what I want to do with my life, to have to worry about that.
The long-standing career politicians feel sick about it too, or so many of them do. I remember Martin Sabo just told me how disappointed he was to see things shift as they have, and I'm sure it's just very, very different now than it used to be.
And people don't take the time. It's much harder to get to know one another. I think this year with the new calendar out, it looks like we're going to be working 5 days a week and not having as much time to work back in the district. But there's a lot of work to do. But when you fly back and home, you're only there, you get in at 6:30 on Monday night, and then you leave Thursday at 3 o'clock, and they're trying to jam everything into a week. You don't develop those personal relationships. So I've really gone out of my way to develop some relationships, not only with some of my Democratic colleagues from around the country, but I have some really good friends on the other side of the aisle. And that's really important, to understand somebody's district and why they're voting the way that they do. Even here in Minnesota, I mean, you look at Colin Peterson and Keith and I and Tim Walz and Rick Nolan, and then you've got Tom Emmer and our new congressman who's coming on now, and Eric Paulson. We all represent kind of unique parts of Minnesota. And our job is to get our jobs done for our district, for our state, and for our country. And you can only do that when you work together and try to get to know one another.
So would you say that's one of the things that make you a good leader, your ability to get along with people from the other
Well, you know,
side?
it's being honest with people. It's being respectful of their election certificates. So one of the things when I got elected to Congress, I wanted to get to meet a lot of people in my own caucus. And so I volunteered to become a whip, not to whip people into shape like it talks about, but to ask somebody, well, are you voting for this piece of legislation? And if not, why not? And sometimes, you know, they would say that, you know, I don't support the Farm Bill because of X, Y, and Z. And it would make total sense once they describe something to you. You might not agree with them, but you could understand their point of view.
The why behind it.
And now the same thing's true with other people on the other side of the aisle. But sometimes, I mean, there is no finding common ground on certain issues. I'm pro-choice, and I'm respectful of people who have a different view. But I expect that same respect back, representing my constituents in a woman's right to choose. Climate change is another thing. You know, there are a lot of people who just don't believe in it. They don't think that man-made, you know, heat that's gone into our air has caused the planet to warm up to potentially a dangerous level. Other people believe it, but they feel like they can't say it out loud. It's a big secret. And then there's people who want to work on it.
Sure. And I mean, this is shifting, and I've been, you know, extremely concerned about this particular issue myself. And you know, the science is there, but people, as you say, do come from a different position in terms of why they think the way they do. One of your very important roles is being on the Appropriations Committee. And tell us, you know, that was something you lobbied to get on, you were just telling me. Does being on that committee, does that give you a sense of responsibility, a sense of power that you didn't have before you were on it? So, how does it change your working life?
Yeah, so one of the things that you can have lots of good ideas, but if you can't put the resources behind the idea to make it happen, it kind of stays an idea. So when I was in the Minnesota State House, I realized that being on the Environment Policy Committee was good, but being on the Environment Finance Committee was even better. And so when I got to Congress, I said I wanted to be on the Appropriations Committee. Martin was on it, Congressman Sabo at the time, and it was like, well, Minnesota's a small state, 2 people, you're never going to get on. And kept asking for it and kept working really hard and developed a relationship that I listened to people, because part of the appropriations process is recognizing that your needs for your district and your state are important, but there's 50 other states out there and U.S. territories that all have needs too, and building collaboration to pass spending bills. And the Appropriations Committee is important. It's mentioned in the Constitution, as well as Ways and Means, which does taxation. So when the Senate seats came open, I was on the Appropriations Committee, and I went, no, thank you. I'm going to stay right where I am, and I am so pleased to be there.
Well, it's got to feel very, very good to be in that position. And one of the subcommittees you're on is the Environment and Interior. And with the recent nomination of Pruitt to be head of the EPA, I'm wondering your reaction. And I should tell you, viewers, that we are taping on December 12th. So you may be watching this much later, and there may be a lot of change in the context of what we're talking about. But just where we are today, December 12th, 2016, your take on that and how disappointing, I'm guessing.
It is disappointing. Well, I'm pleased with who President-elect Trump has said who's going to be the overall Secretary of Interior, Kathy McMorris Rogers, who I served with. And we're not going to see eye to eye on everything, but she's got a good level head. She listens to people. I know she comes from a state where the environment's important, so I look forward to working with her. But Mr. Pruitt's a little concerning. I talked to a good friend of mine, Tom Cole. He's a Republican from Oklahoma. We're on the Interior Subcommittee together. We co-chair the Native American Caucus, and I said, so what can you tell me about Mr. Pruitt? And he said, he's a nice guy. He'll always hear you out. He said, but I don't think you two are going to have a whole lot in common. And my challenge with what many of my Republican colleagues are doing now is the attacks on the EPA. If you think back, when I was in high school and in college in the early 70s, Republicans and Democrats came together, Clean Air, Clean Water Act, because we were destroying our lakes and rivers. The acid rain in the air was just, destroying our health, the health of our planet, but the health of, lakes and rivers and streams here in Minnesota. So you kind of put that together, and there was a core set of values that we had a responsibility to try to keep our air and water as clean as we could, not only for our own health, but for the next generations. And that seems to have gone by the wayside. And anything that the EPA wants to talk about regulating or making sure that we don't have hazardous toxins in our water, or that we're not breathing these particular particles that are really causing heart attacks and lung disease, that's off limits, that the EPA shouldn't be doing that. And so...
Why do you think, Betty, why did that shift? I mean, it seems like it's such a universal need to take care of our families and our children, and that it would not be a party thing.
I think that's an interesting question to pose to someone from Minnesota, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or green or Independence Party, whatever, because we're the only state in the union back a while ago that passed a constitutional amendment, the Legacy Amendment, to protect water, to look at our environmental standards. So I come from
increased taxes for all of us,
and we voted
right?
on it as a state. And so I kind of bring those core values, and I said, no, our whole state decided that this is important. This isn't a Democratic value or a Republican value. This is a value that we share as Minnesotans, and I know other people around the country share it too. So
it's a model, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
A wonderful model.
And the arts as well too. And so I have, and I know that there's people in Minnesota who at times might not agree with all my stances on things, but by and large, my constituents are like, go up there and protect the environment.
Good. So, what are you anticipating is going to be most at threat if Pruitt is the EPA guy and things proceed that way? Do you think it's water that we're going to be mostly, or you will be fighting for?
I think it's both water and air. I mean, the Clean Power Plant regulations that President Obama put in and forward, they're going to be under attack, even though a lot of leading healthcare professionals, doctors, people who care about the environment, people who care about what's happening with climate change, all say that going with this regulation will clean our air, it'll slow down the heating up of our planet, it's a win-win for everyone. Our energy companies in Minnesota, our state of Minnesota, by and large supports this, but there were some power plants out on the East Coast and coal operators that didn't want to put in the new scrubbers and make the reforms and upgrade their plants the way we have in many parts of the United States, including here in Minnesota. So they've been very hesitant, reluctant, gone to court, and so there's talk about repealing that from the EPA. And there's Waters of the USA, so which kind of came a lot from the mountaintop mining. So in parts of the country where they mine, rather than the men, and these were very dangerous jobs, and we owe these men, that was why we almost didn't pass the last continuing resolution to make sure that they got the health care that they needed. These are mostly men who go down to the coal mines, and they put their health at risk to power our steel mills and all that, and they should be taken care of. And that's, if we have time, we can go into that. But anyways, with the mountaintop mining now, they just blow off the tops of the mountains, and trees and rocks and debris and all that go rolling down the mountains and blocking streams, which affects rivers and everything else. And so what the policy that the Obama administration was putting forward with Waters of the USA is, we have a responsibility to make sure the waters of the USA are healthy. And for example, Minnesota actually has more stringent rules on protecting water than the EPA does federally. So Waters of the USA really wouldn't have much impact here in Minnesota at all. Now, it might in a few areas, and then if there's problems in places to work on, whether it's a farmer or a business with a legitimate reason, and we can come together and say, well, this regulation needs to change because it's not really protecting the waters in the way that we had hoped it would, and it's causing, problems, then you go back and fix them. You just don't repeal the whole Waters of the USA.
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm hearing this administrator's looking at doing, as well as, more fracking, which is interesting because Oklahoma's having problems with fracking right now and earthquakes. So I think there's a way we can come together and do alternative energy and, cleaner power plants and all that, but that means doing the hard work and not just, saying, I'm just going to repeal it.
And hard work it is. I was asking Betty before we started a question about how do you prioritize all the things you care about? And your comment was so interesting. You said,
whether I'm on the Interior Subcommittee and I'm on the Defense Committee. And climate change is driving both of them. So if you look at the security memos that the Department of Defense puts out, climate change, and this is the Department of Defense, so this isn't, tree huggers, right? These are people who watch what's going on in the world, and with climate change, they're seeing more people having stress under not having crops, because of not having water, because of the way that the climate is changing in this earth. The deserts are expanding, water's evaporating, all the challenges and stresses on
migration
that.
Of
migration,
people and
then as sea levels rise. I mean, I've had the opportunity to travel to Bangladesh. Bangladesh will be underwater. I mean, where do all these people go? It creates more refugees. So the Department of Defense is very, very interested in climate change and saying that we as a nation should work to be a leader to reduce the stress on human activity that's going to be caused by climate change, and more conflicts, more wars, more starvation, more hunger. And then the Department of Defense uses a lot of energy. So they're looking at alternative energy, and they're building solar power, places on Camp Pendleton and all around, anything to reduce their costs, which is good for the American taxpayer. So working on the issues I work on the Interior Committee are a lot of the same issues I work on the Department of Defense Committee
and
too.
That's got to, in some ways, help your sense of being spread thin. I mean, I'm sure you feel spread thin just with all the info you have to absorb and think about and make decisions about. But to have your priority, energy and climate change, has to.
And those aren't
somewhat relieving.
It is, and those aren't the things that people like to work on the Defense Committee. They, you know, what's the next bomber or the next submarine, and all that's really important. I'm not saying it's not important, but there's a lot of things that I can work on, whether it's military health care, energy efficiency, reducing our soldiers' needs to be out in the world by doing something about climate change. So it gives me a vantage point to work on that. And right now, with what's going on with Russia, cybersecurity is something that I got very much involved in, going to classified intelligence briefings. So we have to do something about Russia's, it's an attack on our democracy, the fact that they hacked into one of our major political parties. Yes, it's my party, but I'd be just as outraged if it was the Republican Party or the Green Party.
This is going to get a lot of attention, isn't it?
That's a non-starter. And that's an attack on our democracy, on our sovereignty.
I heard John McCain talking today about some of the plans to really look at this very, very carefully. But you sound excited about getting back into, you know, business in January. Do you have any suggestions for citizens who I think are, so many of them, feeling very tense about the partisanship in Washington, about the fact that whether their candidate won or lost, there's just a lot of kind of sadness in the country. Do you have any tips for people in terms of action steps or ways to kind of get over some of their negative feelings about politics in America?
Well, I think get involved. Whether you get involved working on climate change or supporting arts and the humanities, or if you want to be involved on other environmental issues, or you know, you have a stake in what the next farm bill looks like, get involved, learn about it, be open to find out what some of the challenges are that a person on the other side of the issue might have, and focus.
Listen.
And see if you can focus on what's in common. Really focus on what's in common, because at the end of the day, I really think we all want the same things. We want our children to be healthy. We want good health, of course, for ourselves. We want opportunity. We want to see success in the world. And we know if we can have that, and our communities can have that, and our nation can have that, and we can project that to the world, we'll have a more peaceful world.
Well, that is a wonderful place for us to have to say goodbye. I love your approach, and I hope that you can really make a difference, as you have been. And I think we need people like you more than ever, Betty.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all you've done, and good luck in the next term.
Well, this is great. I've been watching you on TV for years, so.
Oh, it's great to have you here. I've been talking with Betty McCollum. If you'd like to get a hold of her and bend your ear, you can check her website out, and lots of ways to reach her. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back again, or I'll be back again next week. I guess I can't promise, Betty. Have a good week. Bye-bye.